The 6,711th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. As this is the first meeting of the Council for the month of February 2012, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency, Mr. Baso Sanku, Permanent Representative for South Africa, for his service as President of the Security Council for the month of January 2012. I am sure I speak for all members of the Council in expressing deep appreciation to Ambassador Sanku and his delegation for the great diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. Under Rule 37 of the Provisional Rules of Procedure of the Council, I invite the representatives of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Kuwait, Libya, Oman, Qatar, Tunisia, and Turkey, and the Syrian Arab Republic to take part in the current meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2012/77, which contains the text of a draft resolution submitted by Germany, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Colombia, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, United States, France, Jordan, Kuwait, Libya, Morocco, Oman, Portugal, Qatar, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Togo, Tunisia, and Turkey. It is my understanding that the Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall now put the draft resolution to the vote. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2012/77 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of 2 members of the Security Council. I now give the floor to the members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. Morocco has the floor. Mr. President, first and foremost, may I express the congratulations of Morocco on your assumption of the presidency of the Council for this month. Similarly, we would like to express our appreciation for the efforts made by Ambassador Baso Sanku and his colleagues during their presidency of the Council last month. Mr. President, I would like to express our great regret and disappointment because of the fact that the Council has not been able to adopt the draft resolution we submitted 3 days ago. We hope, most sincerely, that the fact that we were not able to adopt this draft resolution in the Council would not be a pretext for any backsliding, a more dangerous backsliding in the fraternal country of Syria, and an increase in the number of civilian casualties there. It should be recalled, Mr. President, that when Hamad bin Qasim, who is the chairman of the Arab Syrian Committee, and Mr. Al-Arabi, the Secretary General of the Arab League, when they made their presentations to the Council, there was also a request made, quite clearly, and in an urgent manner, to come to the support in the Council of a regional organization which has come up with an initiative which was bold, complete, and integral, based on virtue of dialogue and understanding and international or national understanding, in order to reach a peaceful solution for a situation which is only getting worse with time. Morocco, on the basis of its responsibility as the Arab member of the Security Council, and in close cooperation with other member states in the Council and non-members, especially Arab countries, we have made continual efforts in order to reach a consensus which might enable the Council to speak with a single voice, and this after about a year of this crisis in neighboring Syria. Morocco highly appreciates all members of the Council who have submitted this draft with us for their reaction. And here I am referring to the reaction of members of the Council without exception, regarding their proposals, and we duly appreciate the understanding and the flexibility reflected, as you know, in the draft resolution. With these efforts, we have worked together and we have endeavored to reach a common agreement which would not be at all controversial: the immediate end to all hostilities and acts of violence, and to encourage productive dialogue which would enable the Syrian people to establish its national political institutions. Also preserve the territorial integrity and social unity of Syria, and no less important, to forestall any external military intervention. Now, Mr. President, that the Council has not been able to reach a decision to support the Arab initiative, the roadmap still exists as the only tool and the exemplary framework which the Arab League should continue to use in its efforts to make it active. Mr. President, we are feeling terrible pain because of the horrible events we are all aware of, and we ask that God bless all those victims so that the bloodshed might end, and that the various factions of the Syrian people might be able to reach a democratic state in order to create a single, open-ended society which would enjoy understanding and concord. We hope that the Security Council will not have to deal once again with this situation, whereas it is getting worse. We hope that all those who have influence on all the parties spare no effort, whereas the Security Council has not been able to arrive at a decision, so that a larger number of innocent victims does not occur, and that we put an end to the use of violence. Thank you, sir. I thank the representative of Morocco, council member, for its statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France. Mr. President, it is with great sadness and great concern that I note today that a double veto has just been exercised on a draft resolution on Syria, a draft which was supported by all the other members of the Council. It is a sad day for this Council. It is a sad day for Syrians, and a sad day for all the friends of democracy. And above and beyond the thousands of dead, wounded, tortured, and imprisoned since the beginning of the repression almost a year ago, history has now compounded our shame, since today is the anniversary of the Hama massacre, and the day after, another heinous massacre in Homs. Father and son are killing, and it would seem to be hereditary in Damascus. It is now 10 months that we have been discussing Syria, and we've only come up with a simple presidential statement on the 3rd of August 2011 because of a veto which has already been exercised in October to a state which has also changed. What has happened in these past 10 months? More than 6,000 Syrians have fallen victim to repression. And what do we know really about this? 10 days ago, Ms. Pillay, the Human Rights Commissioner, said that henceforth she could not count the number of the victims of repression. The Secretary General of the United Nations has constantly called upon this Council to act, to stop these crimes against humanity committed in Syria, and the Council has remained silent. The Human Rights Council 3 times has pointed out the overwhelming responsibility of the Syrian regime, and this Council has remained silent. 133 states in the General Assembly have solemnly condemned these criminal actions and have called for an end to them without delay, and this Council has remained silent. The Arab League, in this same room, only 3 days ago, called on the Council to support its action because of the refusal to listen of the Syrian regime. Also, in the face of the risks that this refusal to listen entails for the entire region, the Secretary General of the Arab League and the Prime Minister of Qatar, in this very place, advocated a solution which is the only credible way towards a peaceful settlement of the Syrian crisis. A resolution submitted by Morocco and broadly co-sponsored in the Council and outside it, deemed consensual for the most part, proposed this support of the Council to regional efforts. Nothing more, nothing less, and the Council still remains silent. We must not overlook this harrowing conclusion that 2 permanent members of the Council have systematically been obstructing any action in the Security Council. They are doing this with a full knowledge of the tragic consequences entailed by their decisions for the Syrian people, and they are doing this by making themselves complicit in a policy of repression carried out by the Damascus regime. They have taken the part of the Assad regime against the Syrian regime, whatever they might actually say or do. I know the arguments which will be brought in by those who today oppose the action of the Council. I've already heard them say that only a few more days would have been enough to come to an agreement. A few days, whereas hundreds of Syrians are dying. Syrians are dying every day. And it's no longer possible to wait. As long as this draft resolution represents the broadest possible consensus of the international community by supporting the efforts of the regional actors to find a peaceful solution to the crisis. For 10 days, we have been accused of trying to overthrow a regime to prepare for military intervention. This is obviously false. We have fully answered such concerns. Right here, 3 days ago, our ministers stated that there was no question of imposing on Syria a political regime. The draft resolution on this point, as on that of armed intervention, was crystal clear. How much time have we lost in debating points? This procrastination, these maneuvers, this hesitation is not consistent with the tragedy being experienced by the Syrian people. History will judge harshly those who have prevented the Council from lending support to the efforts of the Arab League in order to carry out its plan. In so doing it, they have, without scruple, aligned themselves with a regime which is massacring its people. They have felt that their presence in the Middle East now depended on the future of the Assad regime, and that this regime will have the same fate. I have said today is a sad day, but we will not stop here. We have no right to abandon the Syrian people to its tragic fate. I say to Syrians that France will continue to work in all bodies, with all partners, sharing its values, and towards the objective which should bring us together today, put an end to the Syrian nightmare. We will continue to work with the Arab League, whose plan is still on the table, even if it has not been endorsed by the Council. We will continue to support the peaceful Syrian opposition, which is endeavoring to gather around the Syrian National Council. We will continue to increase pressure by imposing further sanctions from the European Union. Mr. President, my final word would be for the Syrian people who, with unheard of courage, have for 10 months not lost sight of their future freedom. From this Council, I would like to extend to them France's full support and our determination to continue relentlessly our action. We have been subjected to a first double veto, and we came back to the Council. Today, we now have a second one from these same countries, but they will not stop us for the sake of the principles guiding this Council and the action of the United Nations, and for the sake of our responsibility as a permanent member. Thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of France, member of the Security Council, for that statement, and I call now on the representative of Germany.
Germany and the overwhelming majority of this Council supported the draft resolution that was submitted by Morocco on behalf of the Arab states. However, 2 permanent members of this Council chose to exercise their veto. That is to say that after more than 11 months of brutal violence and repression by the Syrian government, after more than 5,500 deaths, and after the killing of almost 400 children, and after far too many peaceful protesters were detained, tortured, raped, and abused, today the Security Council again failed to assume its responsibilities and to live up to its mandate, the maintenance of international peace and security. In short, the people in Syria and the region have been let down again, and this is a crying shame. Even more so in the light of the recent massacres in Homs, and even more so in the light of one of the bloodiest days in the Arab Spring, and even more so on the tragic 30th anniversary of the Hama massacre. And this is the real scandal. Mr. President, Germany's position is very clear. This Council should urge Assad to stop the killing. His regime has to put an immediate end to the violence. It has to stop the massive, gross, and systematic violation of human rights. This was the first major element of the draft before us. Mr. President, many of the demands expressed in this draft resolution actually have been accepted by the Syrian government on December 19th. The Syrian government agreed to the cessation of violence, to the release of all political prisoners, to the withdrawal of the armed forces, and to the unhindered freedom of movement of observers and journalists. According to the League of Arab States, however, none of these commitments were fully met by the Syrian government. Mr. President, last Tuesday, this Council heard a remarkable plea by the Arab League. The Arab states urged this council not to let the Syrian people down. They urged us, the members of this council, to support them in order to solve the crisis in Syria. And this was the second major element of our draft resolution, to answer the call from Arab states and large parts of the international community to fully support the initiative of the League of Arab States, an initiative that is aimed to find a political, Syrian-led solution to the crisis. This was the core of the draft. Mr. President, the draft resolution did not contain an arms embargo, nor a sanctions regime, as we had wished for, nor did it mandate a commission of inquiry into human rights violations, as we had advocated. We regret it didn't. But we negotiated in a spirit of compromise, and we were ready for substantial concessions. The draft did also not call for regime change, as some maintain. What it did, however, was to support a political framework set out by the Arab League. This framework is intended to facilitate a Syrian-led political transition to a democratic and plural political system. Because this is what it's all about, to have the Syrian people itself decide on its own political future. This is the way how peace and security are best achieved in Syria and beyond. And this is what the majority here in the Council agrees upon. We regret that 2 Council members disagreed. Mr. President, violence in Syria has to stop. A political dialogue has to begin under the auspices of the League of Arab States. There is a political way out of this crisis. We are afraid that today's decision, however, will spur further violence and make it harder to reach a political solution. Nevertheless, Germany will continue to work with all partners in the region to support the Arab League. Mr. President, as much as we regret today's decision, let me reassure you that Germany continues to stand ready to work with all members of this Council to overcome our division and to bridge the gaps. Not only do we owe it to the Syrian people, we also owe it to the mandate of this Council, the maintenance of peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Germany for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Mr. President, the United States is disgusted that a couple members of this Council continue to prevent us from fulfilling our sole purpose here, addressing an ever-deepening crisis in Syria and a growing threat to regional peace and security. For months, this Council has been held hostage by a couple members. These members stand behind empty arguments and individual interests while delaying and seeking to strip bare any text that would pressure Assad to change his actions. This intransigence is even more shameful when you consider that at least one of these members continues to deliver weapons to Assad. The United States has long said that it's past time that this Council assumed its responsibilities and imposed tough, targeted sanctions and an arms embargo on the Assad regime, as many individual countries have already done. But this draft didn't even do that. The text simply supported an Arab League plan that Assad himself already agreed to uphold, and the subsequent Arab League decision towards a peaceful resolution of the crisis. The co-sponsors of this draft have truly gone the last mile to try to reach consensus on a draft that already more than accommodates the concerns of a few Council members about the use of force and sanctions. Subsequent attempts today to introduce wrecking amendments at the very 11th hour, only to further delay Council action, are unforgivable. Since yesterday, the Syrian government has waged and intensified an especially horrific campaign in homes to murder hundreds, including women and children, with artillery and tanks and other indiscriminate violence. Syrian forces continue to prevent hundreds of innocent and injured civilians from seeking medical help. The international community must protect the Syrian people from this abhorrent brutality. But a couple members of this council remain steadfast in their willingness to sell out the Syrian people and shield a craven tyrant. The United States, by contrast, stands fully and irrevocably with the long-suffering people of Syria. Since these same two council members vetoed the last resolution on Syria, we have heard reports from the High Commissioner for Human Rights that the regime may be committing crimes against humanity. From Arab League Secretary General al-Arabi and from Qatari Prime Minister Hamad bin Jassim, who noted that the Assad regime has, quote, failed to make any serious effort to cooperate with the Arab League, and that Assad's, quote, killing machine continues effectively unabated, end quote. Since these two members last vetoed a resolution on Syria, an estimated 3,000 more civilians have been killed. 3,000. Another almost 250 killed just yesterday. Many thousands more have been held captive and tortured by Assad and his Shabia gangs. Since these two members last vetoed a resolution, however, and despite the absence of Security Council action, we've seen more and more Syrians speak out in peaceful demonstrations against the regime. Once again, the courageous people of Syria can clearly see who on this council supports their yearning for liberty and universal rights and who does not. And during this season of change, the people of the Middle East can now see clearly which nations have chosen to ignore their calls for democracy and instead prop up desperate dictators. Those who oppose this resolution have denied this last chance to end Assad's brutality through peaceful means under Arab League auspices. Any further bloodshed that flows will be on their hands. The governments that once again stymied Council action today need to reverse course and heed the voices of the Syrian people. For their own sake, for the sake of Syria, for the sake of the Middle East, and for the sake of this Council. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is indeed a sad day for the Security Council. Once again, it was unable to act to send a forceful and united message to the Syrian authorities to stop killing and torturing their people, even though in the recent hours hundreds more have been killed. How long will this Council allow the Syrian killing machine to continue to push the country into a bloody sectarian conflict? How many more dead and maimed will it take to finally force this Council into action? It is indeed regretful and particularly worrying that the Security Council was unable to unanimously support the League of Arab States' decision of the 22nd of January to facilitate a political transition to a democratic, plural political system in which all Syrians are equal, regardless of their affiliations or ethnicities or beliefs, and de facto citizens of their country. A Syrian-led political transition that will be based on a serious political dialogue between the Syrian government and the whole spectrum of the Syrian opposition. This is exactly what those who did not support this resolution today had been demanding. The Security Council was unable to respond to the plea of the League of Arab States that it support the Arab world's attempt to end the killings and reach a peaceful political solution to the Syrian crisis. Two goals, I believe, shared by all on this Council. Yet again, the Council has failed to meet its responsibilities towards the Syrian people and to fulfill its role as the primary body entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. Not only is this extremely disappointing, it is simply unacceptable. As was made perfectly clear in this Council last Tuesday, the situation in Syria is untenable and rapidly spiraling towards civil war. Clear and unanimous support by this Council for the efforts of the Arab League is essential if we are to counter such a dangerous development. It was made abundantly clear in this chamber that this resolution was not about regime change. Neither did it seek to impose changes on Syria from outside, much less allow for the use of force or impose sanctions. The sole objective of this resolution was to put an immediate end to the violence and enable a Syrian-owned political dialogue that would allow the Syrian people to determine their own future peacefully. Mr. President, as my minister stated here earlier this week, we fully support the efforts of the League of Arab States regarding Syria, including its decision of the 22nd of January 2012 and the political roadmap therein. They represent the only viable way to solve this crisis peacefully, through a political means. Portugal remains fully committed to the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity and national unity of Syria. We urge all parties in Syria to immediately halt all violence and engage in a serious political dialogue under the auspices of the League of Arab States. Portugal will continue to actively work with the Arab League towards the fulfillment of these objectives. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Portugal for his statement, and I call on the representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, the United Kingdom is appalled by the decision of Russia and China to veto an otherwise consensus resolution submitted by Morocco, the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, Portugal, Colombia, Togo, Libya, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Tunisia, Oman, and Turkey. It has been 10 months since the Syrian people bravely demanded their universal rights, and 10 months since the Syrian regime responded by violently repressing and killing its own people. 6 months ago, this Council adopted a presidential statement condemning the widespread violations of human rights and the use of force against civilians by the Syrian authorities. It called for an immediate end to violence, compliance with obligations under international law, and for the Syrian government to implement its stated commitments to reform. On that day, the death toll in Syria stood at approximately 1,000. But the Syrian regime only continued its brutal repression. 4 months ago, 2 council members vetoed an attempt to send a clear message to the Syrian regime to end the bloodshed. That day, the death toll stood at 3,000, and the Syrian regime only continued its brutal repression. Mr. President, the death toll today stands at around 6,000. The Syrian regime has ferociously escalated its already brutal repression in the last 24 hours, subjecting the citizens of Homs to artillery and heavy weaponry. The death toll will be high. Those that blocked council action today must ask themselves how many more deaths they are prepared to tolerate before they support even modest and measured action. Last Tuesday, this Council and the world heard from His Excellency Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim of Qatar and the Secretary General of the League of Arab States. They came with a simple request for Security Council support for the Arab League's plan to facilitate a political transition and bring about a peaceful resolution to the crisis. The original Moroccan draft resolution did just that. It had from the outset support from the vast majority of Council members and had the backing of the Arab League. Yet some Council members argued that the resolution imposed regime change. It said no such thing. But in an attempt to reach consensus, we provided further assurances in the text. The same minority argued that the text could somehow be used to authorize military intervention. It did no such thing. It was a Chapter 6 resolution. But in an attempt to reach consensus, we provided further assurances in the text. The same minority argued that very modest language expressing concern about weapons was somehow tantamount to an arms embargo. It wasn't, but we took it out. They said that mere mention of the existence of Arab League sanctions was tantamount to United Nations sanctions. It was not, but we took it out in an effort to reach consensus. Mr. President, the facts speak for themselves. There is nothing in this text that should have triggered a veto. We removed every possible excuse. The reality is that Russia and China have today taken a choice to turn their backs on the Arab world and to support tyranny rather than the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. They have failed in their responsibility as permanent members of the Security Council, and they have done so on the most shameful of days of the Syrian killing machine's 300 days of repression. Mr. President, the United Kingdom will continue to support the Arab League's efforts to bring about a peaceful transition in Syria. We shall continue to support the brave Syrian people in their demands for change. The regime must cease the violence. There must now be a transition to a new political dispensation. Should the regime continue on its current bloody trajectory, we will once again bring the issue back to this Council in consultation with our colleagues in the Arab League. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Colombia. Thank you very much, Mr. President. On behalf of Colombia, I would like to state my disappointment at the outcome of this vote, which denies the member countries of the League of Arab States and of this organization the support that has been requested for a plan intended to bring an end to the tragedy being experienced in Syria and to defend the life and rights of the people of that country. Since the beginning of the violent repression by the Syrian government against the civilian population over 10 months ago, we have made so many attempts, so many appeals to find a solution to the crisis. The response has been a continued escalation of brutal use of force and the violation of all human rights of the people of that country. Throughout this process, we have engaged in ongoing dialogue with Arab countries. We always took into account their guidelines and requests to permit and facilitate action by the Arab League before the Council made a decision. This was done until these efforts were no longer taken up, and they specifically requested last week of this Council a support for their political transition plan in order to achieve peace and establish a democratic regime in Syria. Colombia has supported and voted for the resolution submitted by Morocco in response to the request that was formally submitted in this chamber by the Secretary General of the Arab League, and in the belief that it is necessary to rescue the Syrian people from the horrific tragedy they are today experiencing. Thank you, sir. I thank the representative of Colombia for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Guatemala.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our position in regard to the situation in Syria was fully outlined by our foreign minister last Tuesday in this chamber. Our prime objective is to do our part in halting the spiral of violence to which the population of Syria is subject, and to find a political settlement to the crisis being experienced in that country. We are of the view that the League of Arab States has taken an initiative that meets both these objectives, and therefore we voted for the resolution that has been placed before us. We regret that our vote should have come to naught on account of the very particular system of voting that governs our decision-making process. And this adds to the ranks of the casualties of this situation, not only the victims of the violence, and this, of course, is our prime concern, but adds to this list the effectiveness of the Security Council in providing a response that is consistent with the magnitude of the challenges before us. And therefore, lastly, our delegation regrets profoundly that we have failed to fulfill the request by the League of Arab States, and we urge them to persevere with their endeavours, including that of the 22nd of January. Thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of Guatemala for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start by congratulating you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of February. My delegation and I look forward to working with you to make your presidency truly successful. I had an opportunity in an earlier incarnation to have visited your beautiful country. I would also like to take this opportunity to compliment South Africa, Ambassador Baso Sanko and his team for their wise and able stewardship of the Council during January. Mr. President, the Syrian Arab Republic has historically played an important role in the Middle East. Prolonged instability and unrest in Syria have implications for peace and stability in the wider region. India is concerned with the present situation in Syria that has resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians and security forces personnel over the last 10 months. Therefore, since the beginning of the protest, we have called for a peaceful and inclusive political process to address the grievances of all sections of Syrian society. We strongly condemn all violence, irrespective of whoever the perpetrators are. We also condemn all violations of human rights. India holds the rights of expression and peaceful assembly among the fundamental values that should be respected while ensuring stability and security of society. India has conveyed this message to the Syrian leadership, both bilaterally as well as with our IPSA partners. We have impressed upon the Syrian side to abjure violence and pay heed to the aspirations of the people of Syria. This message was also contained in the Council's PRST issued in August 2011 under India's presidency. We are firmly of the view that a political process for resolution of the present crisis should be led by the Syrians themselves. We believe that the main role of the international community, including this Council, is to facilitate engagement of the Syrian people with all sections of Syrian society for an inclusive political process taking into account the legitimate aspirations of all Syrians while ensuring respect for the country's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. We note that the resolution enjoins upon the government to protect its population, indicating that it should have the capacity to do so. The League of Arab States is an important regional organization, should play its required and historic role in promoting political dialogue among the Syrian parties. In this context, we welcomed the deployment of the League's observer mission across several areas of the country, which had a calming effect on the level of violence and provided a more accurate picture of developments. We hope that this mission can be returned soon. Our support for the resolution today is in accordance with our support for the efforts by the Arab League for a peaceful resolution of the crisis through a Syrian-led inclusive political process. We note that the resolution expressly rules out any measures under Article 42 of the Charter and calls for a serious political dialogue between the Syrian government and the whole spectrum of the opposition under the auspices of the League of Arab States. We believe that the leadership of Syria is a matter for the Syrian people to decide. It would be necessary for all opposition forces in Syria to peacefully engage in constructive dialogue with the authorities. We hope this will create a new environment for peace and facilitate a political process. This political dialogue should build upon the political reforms already announced by the Syrian leadership with necessary changes so that they find acceptance among all sections of Syrian society. Thank you.
I thank the representative of India for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, the bloodshed and the violence in Syria has to be ended immediately. For this purpose, the Russian Federation has undertaken active diplomatic efforts in contacts with the Syrians, the Arab neighbors of Syria, and other members of the international community. Today in Moscow, it was announced that on instructions from the President of the Russian Federation, Medvedev, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation, Mr. Lavrov, and the Director of the Service for External Intelligence of the Russian Federation, Mr. Fratkov, will visit Damascus on the 7th of February for a meeting with the President of the Syrian Arab Republic, Mr. Assad. In the Security Council, we have actively tried to find a way for a solution which would be objective and which would truly help in the immediate end to violence and to the establishment of political progress in Syria. The decision of the Security Council should just be one like this because some influential members of the international community, unfortunately, including those sitting around this table from the very beginning of the Syrian process, have been undermining the opportunity for political settlement, calling for a regime change, pushing the oppositionists towards power, and not stopping a provocation, and feeding on methods of struggle. The work done in the Security Council has not been carried out to its conclusion. The draft resolution, as put to a vote, did not adequately reflect the real state of affairs in Syria and has sent an unbalanced signal to the Syrian parties. The co-sponsors of the resolution have not taken into account the wordings for the draft that we propose to the effect that the Syrian opposition must distance itself from extremist groups which are carrying out acts of violence and called upon states and all those who have the relevant opportunities to use their influence to put an end to such acts of violence by such groups. Nor have our proposals been taken into account so that along with the withdrawal from the cities of Syrian armed forces, there be an end put to the attacks on the part of armed groups on state institutions and neighborhoods. Nor has there been support for showing more flexibility for the intermediary efforts of the League of Arab States, which would increase the chances for success for an exclusively Syrian political process. The Russian delegation voted against this draft resolution as submitted. We greatly regret this result of our joint work in the Security Council. We believe that intensive efforts of the international community with a view to putting an immediate end to the violence and have a successful beginning and conclusion of an exclusively Syrian political process and a withdrawal from the country of this country from a crisis will be continued. Russia, for its part, will continue to work precisely in that direction. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, the Security Council just voted on the draft resolution on Syria. China voted against the resolution. China has all along followed closely the developments in Syria. We call on all parties in Syria to stop violence, avoid, in particular, casualties of innocent civilians, restore order in the country as soon as possible, and respect the request of the Syrian people for reform and safeguarding their own interests. This serves the fundamental interests of Syria and its people. We support the good office's efforts made by the Arab League to resolve the Syrian crisis so as to promote early launch of an inclusive political process led by Syrian people and extensively participated by all parties, peacefully resolve differences and disputes through dialogue and negotiations, and restore stability in Syria. The international community should provide constructive assistance to help achieve the above goals. At the same time, the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria should be fully respected. The actions of the Security Council on the Syrian issue should comply with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and help ease the tensions, help promote political dialogue and diffuse disputes, and help maintain peace and stability in the Middle East region, rather than complicate the issue. Under these principles, China has taken an active part in the consultations on the draft resolution and supported the efforts made by the Arab League to facilitate a political settlement of the Syrian issue and maintain stability in the region. Like many Council members, China maintains that under the current circumstances, to put undue emphasis on pressuring the Syrian government, prejudge the result of the dialogue, or impose any solution will not help resolve the Syrian issue, but instead may further complicate the situation. China supports the amendments proposed by the Russian Federation and has taken note that the Russian foreign minister will visit Syria next week. The request for continued consultation on the draft resolution by some Council members is reasonable. It is regrettable that these reasonable concerns are not taken into account. To push through a vote when parties are still seriously divided over the issue will not help maintain the unity and authority of the Security Council or help properly resolve the issue. In this context, China voted against the draft resolution. Syria is an important country in the Middle East. Peace and stability in Syria serves the common interests of the Syrian people and the international community. China will continue to work with the international community and play a positive and constructive role in the proper settlement of the Syrian issue. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and many congratulations on assuming the post with such an important world issue at the very start. Mr. President, The problem in Syria has assumed dimensions which are not only regrettable, but are condemnable. We have to understand that while we have made civilization, we have also condoned words like collateral damage and so many others, which is not my intention to name here today. But I believe we accept too much too easily. Reminds me of 1,000, 2,000 years ago, Pontius Pilate washing his hands and saying, "I have nothing to do with this." And 2,000 years later, we still see humanity suffers that particular point. Pakistan had some serious concerns, mainly against killings and massacre of innocents, but also on a point of principle of the Charter. We were not happy about any infringement of sovereignty or integrity of Syria. There was a very spirited attempt, as related by Mark just now as well, to take care of issues and concerns, and we're thankful for that. I believe that it became important to be able to end killings by asking both sides, and in fact forcing both sides, that it is not acceptable, and that was a strong moral point that the Arab League draft introduced into this. There was a question of amnesty, and I believe it was an accepted fact that everyone has to get into it to stop it. Don't forget, nothing succeeds anywhere in the world against the government without external help. That is a point of history which cannot be ignored. It is easy for those of us who voted today in majority to sit back and say, well, we've done our bit. No, we haven't. We cannot wash our hands off this. We must continue and seek, as the Russian and the Chinese have stated, continue to seek the way forward. And I would believe the best vehicle would be the Arab League plan and the very substantial moves that have been accepted over the last few days. I believe that the offer of no regime change or plurality and the promotion of democracy are important aspects of this situation, and we have stood by that. I believe that even today our system has indeed let us down, but then we have been very clear, without taking political benefit out of it, that this aspect of veto is always a heart-wrencher. And both ways, it cuts itself and lets the other one for the moment, the other side, be beneficial. Either everyone should have the veto and then see how the world gets on, or perhaps we should all consider not using it whatsoever. I think that we've also got to a situation that we will have to continue. We will have to persevere. And I believe that we will have to help further strengthening of relationships. Today, in our decision, it mattered a great deal that our Arab brethren who have been so important to us, that we had to take a strong principle, stand with them, because they wanted it pretty unanimously. And I had raised the question a couple of days earlier. I do not see Tunisia, Egypt, others that are such strong proponents of this. And I'm glad to see that did happen. That's a great plus point in my mind. With a few words reminding that all this was done by good intentions on all sides. I'm not going to take a stick to beat anyone with. I believe consensus was achieved. There were some dropouts of it. I believe we can still work towards that consensus. There is a visit to Syria. In the next few days, I'm sure that some more points may arise. This matter should not be allowed to die. It should remain, this resolution, as an active matter before this Council, and that we should go to it again as soon as is possible, with the help of those who even decided today not to vote for it, so that, being active, we would give hope to those who are expecting it from us. Having said these few things, and to keep the engagement alive, I thank you for giving me this opportunity, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I call now on the representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by congratulating you and Togo for the assumption of Council's presidency for the month of February. Please be assured of South Africa's full support. Mr. President, the world is watching with great concern as the crisis in Syria unfolds and degenerate by the day, claiming civilian lives and injuring and displacing many people, including children. As we have said before, we remain deeply concerned about the deteriorating political, security, socio-economic and humanitarian situation in Syria that continues to escalate despite calls from the international community for the Syrian government and the armed opposition to stop the violence and settle their differences in a peaceful manner. We condemn the violent loss of life in Syria and call for maximum restraint from all the parties to the conflict. We urge the parties to immediately stop the violence and commit themselves to finding a peaceful political solution through a Syrian-led and owned, transparent, and all-inclusive political process that will fulfill the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. Among others, the political process will ensure the guarantee of the people's fundamental political rights and freedoms, and restore the people's dignity through the delivery of democracy, political reform, justice, human rights, and socio-economic development. We believe that such a solution will indeed ensure long-term peace and stability. We regret the slow progress in the implementation of the reforms already announced and encourage the Syrian government to implement these reforms expeditiously. We urge the opposition to commit to fully participate in the implementation of these reforms. Mr. President, South Africa believes that the efforts of the League of Arab States, as an organization with knowledge of and proximity to the situation in Syria, should be supported and given the necessary political space to find a solution to the Syrian crisis. South Africa supports the efforts of the League of Arab States in order to facilitate a Syrian-led political process as stated in the resolution. It is important that the Syrian people be allowed to decide their own fate, including their future leadership. Fundamentally, no foreign or external parties should interfere in Syria as they engage in the critical decision-making process on the future of their country. Any solution must preserve the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Syria. We are also satisfied that the final draft resolution was not aimed at imposing regime change in Syria, which would be against the purposes and the principles of the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, we sincerely hope that the Syrian government and the opposition will continue to cooperate with the League of Arab States in its efforts to assist them reach a peaceful political solution. We further call on the international community to render support to this process and refrain from actions and statements that may polarize the parties and delay or even paralyze the League of Arab States process. Mr. President, the current political environment in the Middle East, a region whose geopolitics cannot afford to have a weak or a conflict-ridden Syria, warrants us to act responsibly in the interest of regional and international peace and security. South Africa has voted in favor of this resolution today because we believe that it has the potential to help facilitate a Syrian-led political process and dialogue between the Syrian parties and bring long-term peace and stability in the country in accordance with the aspirations of the Syrian people. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of South Africa for his statement. I give the floor now to the representative of Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Azerbaijan is deeply concerned at the continuing crisis and widespread violence in Syria that resulted in the death of many people. Despite repeated calls by the international community, the situation in Syria continued to deteriorate, causing scores of deaths and injuries. Azerbaijan has, from the very beginning, supported the efforts of the League of Arab States and is looking forward to their continuation with a view to ending violence, overcoming the crisis, and finding a solution by peaceful means and through dialogue. The only solution to the crisis in Syria is through an inclusive and Syrian-led political process with the aim of effectively addressing the legitimate aspirations and concerns of Syria's people without external interference. This understanding has been clearly expressed in the draft resolution. It is crucial that obligations with respect to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of Syria and all other states in the region are fully observed and respected. It is important that the draft resolution emphasized that the current political crisis in Syria must be resolved peacefully and noted that nothing authorizes measures under Article 42 of the United Nations Charter. Azerbaijan supported the draft resolution on the aforementioned understanding and with the hope that its adoption would contribute to ongoing efforts aimed at encouraging dialogue, overcoming the crisis, and putting an end to human sufferings. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Azerbaijan for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Togo. Togo had hoped that the situation that has existed for almost a year in Syria would allow the Security Council to send a strong message to the leaders and opposition in that country to bring an end to violence and embark on a process of political negotiation that is inclusive and transparent. It is for this reason, moreover, that Togo voted for the draft resolution submitted by Morocco and was co-sponsor of the text. Unfortunately, the Council was not able to send this message to the Syrian political class, and my country deplores this state of affairs. Our Council, which has a prime responsibility to maintain international peace and security, once again has failed to bring peace and security to Syria and failed to speak with a single voice. Despite this failure, the Council must be able to continue to seek the ways and means to bring peace to Syria. The people of Syria cannot continue to suffer, to weep, to bury their dead, while our Council stands passively watching. We must act. Togo will continue to do all it can to ensure that we embark on a course of action to be taken. I resume my function now as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. أهنئ بلادكم الصديقة توغو وأهنئكم شخصيا على ترأسكم لمجلس الأمن لهذا الشهر، ونتمنى لكم
Microphone, please. Thank you, Mr. President. I congratulate your friendly country, Togo, and Your Excellency, Sir, on your assumption of the presidency of the Security Council during this month. We wish you all success in fulfilling this sensitive stewardship. Also, I would like to congratulate His Excellency, my colleague, Ambassador Passo, the Ambassador of South Africa, for presiding over the Council during the past month. Mr. President, I think that drawing inspiration from history in this chamber is an extremely important exercise. Invoking examples from the cultures and traditions of peoples and nations is a critical asset. I am saying these words and I am recalling in this context the literary masterpiece written by the German man of letters Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And the title of that masterpiece was Dr. Faustus. It is a novel that speaks in symbolic terms on the risks inherent in the fact that a person, any person who might be very wise, by selling his soul to Satan. This symbolic story almost captures what I would like to prelude my full statement at, namely that a human being should not sell his or her soul to Satan in return for supposed gains that could bring destruction of that person's hope for freedom down the road later. My delegation, Mr. President, has examined the text of the draft resolution put before this August Council. Given our firm belief in the pan-Arab role, we had hoped that the examination of the question of Syria would have remained first exclusively in the Syrian household and then in the larger supporting Arab structure. But the rush by some parties to invite international intervention, which we know in advance the objectives of its dealing with Arab issues, first and foremost the question of Palestine and the Israeli occupation of Arab territories, is a cause for concern. It is indeed a cause for sadness, deep sadness for the regrettable state of affairs that we now find ourselves now. At this point, Mr. President, I would like to quote in English a sentence which was said some 22 years ago, said by the former United States Attorney General, Mr. Ramsey Clark. He said, and I quote,
which was created to prevent the scourge of war has become an instrument of war.
My delegation has followed with full appreciation the efforts made by the advocates in this Council for the rights of people and the Charter of the United Nations, as well as its objectives and purposes, especially the inadmissibility of intervention in the internal affairs of countries and waging wars against those countries in order to gain exclusive control of their geographical location as well as their lucrative natural resources, and the resolution of Western power economic problems at the expense of the peoples of the developing nations. For those states that safeguard international peace and security, we wish to express our deep gratitude, and the annals of history would record these noble positions for them. Isn't it strange, Mr. President, that this Security Council has adopted over a period of 45 years, i.e., since its creation in 1945 until 1988, depended or adopted only 690 resolutions. And in the following 20 years, the Security Council adopted 3 times this number, 3 times of resolutions. This is an indicator that the current world is less secure, less just, less fair, and that the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations are under severe threats. I would like to stress, Mr. President, in this context, that the Syrian Arab Republic, which is a founding member of this world organization, has been targeted by some powers to punish it as a result of its commitment to international legality, especially in areas of defending the rights of people. Today, Syria is a sacrifice of a crisis manufactured by parties that do not want good for Syria and its people, by the support given by these parties in terms of money and arms and favorable media coverage to armed terrorist groups that kill, abduct, and intimidate Syrian citizens, and destroying and sabotaging the infrastructure, including power generation equipment, oil and gas pipelines, premises of the Ministry of Justice, railroads. Mr. President, is there a sensible person who would believe that a given government would commit massacres in a given city on a day when the Security Council is scheduled to hold a meeting to examine the situation in that country? Would any entity put itself in such a position? The most convincing proof of the criminal nature of these groups, Mr. President, are the acts committed today, this morning, that killed and destroyed lives of innocent people, homes, buildings of Syrian embassies in many capitals, supported by media campaigns. All that is taking place in order to send out a misleading message that would influence this August Council in order to sway the positions of the decision makers in this Council on the draft resolution. The best proof of our good intentions, Mr. President, and our good faith in dealing with the League of Arab States is what is contained in the report of the observers of the League of Arab States. What is really strange is that you have not examined that report in due time for reasons known to all of you. That report has confirmed that Syria has fulfilled its obligations under the protocol. Here, once, twice, for the third time and fourth time, let me stress that if killing ceased and those who pay lip service to democracy cease to implement the design planned against Syria, and if those states that provide generous funds, billions of dollars to the armed groups and providing them with the most recent weapons and means of communication and host them in their capitals in order to facilitate their criminal acts against the Syrian people and their property. Without all that, Syria would have fulfilled the Arab League plan of action and the relevant protocol under that plan. Some Arab Gulf states, Mr. President, have dragged the League of Arab States to the Security Council with a view to leverage the power of this council against Syria and to internationalize a pure Arab issue contrary to the provisions of the Charter of the League of Arab States, despite the fact that from the beginning of the crisis, all Arab politicians in their League of Arab States, all of them were competing among themselves in order to stress that they are not seeking the internationalization of the crisis in Syria. The report of the observer mission that I mentioned has stressed that Syria has fulfilled its obligations despite the acts of violence. Let me quote to this Council paragraph 73 of that report. Quote, "The mission noted that the government of Syria strived to help it succeed in its task and remove any barriers that might stand in its way. The government of Syria also facilitated meetings with all parties. No restrictions were placed on the movement of the mission and its ability to interview Syrian citizens, both those who opposed the government and those loyal to it." End of quotation. Mr. President, some 2 months and a half ago, the Qatari Al Jazeera satellite channel broadcast from Doha a political program hosted by a well-known anchor. The two guests hosted in that program, the current Tunisian president, but at that time he was not the president, and a Syrian political activist. In that program, Mr. President, 2.5 months ago, the host of the program said, speaking to the current Tunisian president, "Don't ask me about the sources of my information, but I have received this information from high levels in Doha. And that information says that the Syrian regime will change on the 22nd of January, i.e. the very same day when the League of Arab States met in Cairo and took a decision to come to this council." Mr. President, it is indeed strange here that the calls for reform, respect for human rights, and allowing peaceful demonstrations apply to Syria only and not to any state in the region, especially those countries that co-sponsored the draft resolution submitted against Syria. Some Arab states that have co-sponsored the draft resolution are the very same states that prevented the Arab League from endorsing the integrated initiative submitted by Syria to the League of Arab States regarding bolstering the process of promotion of democracy and reform and human rights in all Arab states. That initiative has included a demand for issuing a decision by the Council of the Arab League that would put forward a comprehensive Arab vision in order to promote democracy and reform in all Arab countries and to fulfill the aspirations of masses in the areas of freedom, human rights, multi-party system, freedom of information, fair and transparent elections, and guaranteeing freedom of expression and the right of assembly and peaceful demonstration and respect of the rights of minorities, alien residents, and expatriate workers on their land. Is it rational, Mr. President, that among those who co-sponsored this draft resolution are states that prevent women from attending a soccer match? At the same time, those states are calling on Syria to be democratic? Peaceful demonstration, Mr. President, is a basic right guaranteed under Syrian law. Also, demand for reform is a right for every Syrian citizen. No one can deny that. But the thing that no law can guarantee and no state would accept is terrorism, chaos, sabotaging public and private properties, destabilization of a community. And with that, every peaceful demonstrator, every person who calls for genuine reform in order to safeguard the Syrian homeland in the face of great assaults, and all those who seek dialogue as a way for resolving the crisis is not only a welcome partner, indeed a basic component of any endeavor to end the crisis in Syria, as well as an integral part of reform and development in Syria. The draft resolution, which has failed to pass today, emphasizes the importance of dialogue that you are speaking about. And we are for this dialogue, for the success of this dialogue. But those who call for being parties in this dialogue have refused to engage in dialogue openly. And the Security Council is fully aware of that. The League of Arab States is aware of that, as well as the countries who sought and continue to seek hosting that dialogue. This is at a time when my country has welcomed in this council to embark immediately on this dialogue, comprehensive dialogue that is inclusive for all parties, but under the roof of the homeland. But the other side that stonewalled against this dialogue as a result of encouragement by some in order to adopt dominating positions, that side has rejected this dialogue and continues to reject this dialogue until this very moment. It is our hope that the parties that continue to support opposition and armed groups, and those parties spoke about themselves, as indicated in the statements by some of my distinguished colleagues, we plead to them to provide sincere advice to their friends in order to bandwagon the process of national dialogue and abandon the aims that seek to destroy Syria and to allow foreign military intervention, and to join the ranks that would build Syria as it endeavors to renew itself. Syria, Mr. President, will enjoy security and stability as it has enjoyed it at all. Syria will continue to be the homeland of tolerance and openness. Syria will remain the homeland of all Syrians, irrespective of all their affiliations and political positions. There will be no majority, no minority. All that will be developed on the ground by a drive owned by the Syrians themselves without external intervention. Syrians do not need to be waiting for lessons in democracy and human rights from powers that deal with these lofty concepts as if they were commodities traded in a speculative buy and sell exercise in a stock market. Mr. President, my colleague, the distinguished representative of the United States of America, said that she felt disgusted as a result of using by two permanent members of the Security Council of their veto right. Here, I am not evaluating what she said. I do respect her point of view, but nonetheless, I would like to ask her, is this disgust would also apply to 60 vetoes that have been used in this chamber in order to prevent establishing comprehensive peace in the region and the fair resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict and the settlement of the question of Palestine? The statements made by some distinguished colleagues betray the true hostile, genuine intentions of their countries against Syria, the people of Syria, and the government of Syria. All along, the tone of their statements was not diplomatic. Those statements were not in line with the norms of international law when they described the government of Syria as regime and addressed the president of the state of Syria with inappropriate language. It is only logical that we say that using these words in this particular chamber would betray their direct involvement in order to fan the flames of escalation, violence, bloodshed of Syria and Syrians. All these we do not accept at all. I don't want to speak at length, Mr. President, but I would like to close my remarks by raising an important matter, namely that a journalist working at Al Jazeera English channel in London said today, and this is documented, that directions have been issued by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Qatar in order to escalate the media coverage tonight, just hours before the convening of this Security Council session. I leave it for your discretion, ladies and gentlemen, to come to your own conclusions from these instructions that were issued to that media channel, or at least it claims to be so, in order to ratchet up pressure falsely on the Security Council that some massacres are underway in Syria. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement. There are no further speakers on my list. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its consideration of the item on its agenda. The meeting stands adjourned.